So, today I'm going to chat about force feeding yourself. And if you can hear scratching, I've not got a cat behind me. I have got a cat behind me. I think he's under the chair. Anyway, so ignore the scratching. Today I'm going to, there he is. We're going to talk about force feeding yourself. Force feeding yourself is like a super skill, actually. If you have anorexia and you're in recovery, force feeding yourself is going to be this skill that you use over and over again. And I'll tell you why. It's because I mentioned it in this other video before, that often you're really hungry and you want to eat all this food, but then when it gets down to actually eating it, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. That's the fight or flight one, and you freak out and suddenly you don't feel hungry at all. And you're like, nope, no, actually I don't want to eat anything other than salad. And in order to push past that, you usually have to force feed yourself. So for example, I'm like driving home, had anorexia, and I'm in recovery and I'm thinking about pizza and I really want pizza and I'm just fantasizing about this pizza. And I get into the kitchen, get home finally, and I walk into the kitchen and I'm like, nope, I just want vegetables actually. I don't even like pizza. I don't want pizza at all. Why was I even thinking I wanted to eat pizza? That's ridiculous. That's a stupid idea. Never want to eat pizza. Nope. Right? So then when I finally clued into that, and I was like, oh, so this thing keeps happening where I don't follow through and eat the food that I really need to eat. My body needs pizza, not salad. And this thing keeps happening where I don't follow through and eat it. And I decided, right, next time that happens, or even tonight, right now. And as I've said many times, I used information on the Feast website, which is for parents trying to refeed children to help me recover. And I read on that forum, and there's all these parents on there that are making their kids sit down at the table, and they're not allowed to leave the table until they've eaten the food. So they're kind of forcing the children to eat the food. And which sounds, initially, that sounds horrible. You're like, you're force feeding that poor kid. And then you realize, oh, this kid's about to die of malnutrition. Of course they're going to force it to eat. That's the kindest thing that they could do. So that helped me realize that force feeding food when a person is in malnutrition is an act of love, not an act of cruelty. And then I realized I had to apply that to my own self, that I would need to force feed myself food as an act of self-love. Didn't feel like it at the time. Gonna admit, it did not feel like self-love at the time when I was crying, shaking, forcing myself to eat pizza. Didn't feel particularly loving, but it was, wasn't it? Because guess what? Got my body out of malnutrition eventually. So you do have to learn this skill where you decide, I'm just going to make myself eat this whole damn thing. And you force it down regardless of how much your brain disagrees and regardless of how those little thoughts keep on coming in of, no, I don't really need to do this. I don't really need to eat this. Eaten enough already, eaten quite enough, don't need to eat anymore. There's far too much food here. I couldn't possibly eat. All those thoughts, you ignore them. And you keep putting the food in your mouth, chew, swallow, repeat. That's how you force feed yourself. And I have fed myself crying and shaking, having little tantrums on my own at the kitchen table. I've been there and done all those things. But being able to force feed yourself is a super skill when you are in recovery, because let's face it, if you were able to intuitively eat the amount of food that your body needs, you wouldn't be where you are now. You definitely wouldn't be watching this YouTube video about anorexia, would you? Nope. You're probably going to have to force feed yourself. And often we can be really very hungry and want to eat a lot of food and still have to force feed ourselves because, as I said before, as soon as the food comes, you convince yourself that you don't really want to eat it or you don't need to eat that much and all of that crap. Now, the other thing that's great about learning and honing in on this skill of force feeding yourself is that it's going to come in handy, because the first year or so of recovery, we have to do all this neural rewiring to do. You do a lot of that as you're force feeding yourself. As you're making yourself eat that pizza, you are also training your brain that nothing bad happens when you eat those foods. So that's part of the neural rewiring process. And you do get the vast majority of it done. If you focus on eating the foods that you're scared of and doing all the things that you're scared of, you'll get a lot of that neural rewiring done in the first, initial, as you gain weight, as you actually eat more food. So that's great. But if you had anorexia a very long time, then there will be certain kind of like standout situations where you don't get an opportunity to rewire it in that initial couple of months. So for example, moving house, losing your job, losing someone that you love, these sort of lifetime stressors, these things that pop up every now and then. When that happens, often our brains will still have not rewired that stress response reaction of restriction. And so I found that in the first couple of years of recovery, when new things happen, usually unfortunately not great things, or sometimes great things like moving, but it was just stressful, you know. So, but I found that like when some big life thing happened or some big stressful thing happened, my appetite would go. It was like my stress response was still wired to be like that. And I had to bring back that skill of force feeding myself to ensure that I continued eating through those times of stress. Now, after a couple of years of going through and force feeding myself in times of stress, that response got rewired as well. That stress response got rewired. And now my stress response is not to lose my appetite at all, which is fabulous because I force fed myself through that and made my brain stop thinking that that was appropriate. So I'm just saying that it's a great skill. Work on this skill. Perfect this skill of being able to eat when you really don't want to. It's going to serve you well. It's something that you're going to want to have in your back pocket for a good while until there is nothing in your brain that feels like it needs to restrict times of stress or anything like that, until all those responses are completely rewired. But it's a skill that you are going to use day in, day out in those initial stages of recovery when you are challenging yourself to eat the foods that you're most scared of.